Hi, everyone, and welcome to Cofense's Cybersecurity Awareness Month webinar. My name is Rachel Roldan, and I am the VP of Product here at Cofense. Alongside me is Josh Bartolome, who is our VP of Global Threat Services, and Lee Martin, who is our Senior Director of PhishMe SAT Solutions. On the agenda for today, we will walk you through the various types of phishing categories, give you some insight into the current state of email security, then showcase different variations of phishing along with some examples, and then talk about some best practices you can use both in the workplace and at home. With the time remaining, we will answer as many questions as we can. To start things off, on the screen here, you will see common phishing tactics. We are going to dive into each of these to explain what they are and how they work. First up is URL phishing. This tactic entices the recipient to take action by clicking on a link within the email body. Once that click occurs, it can lead to several different scenarios that we'll talk about throughout the presentation, all centered around getting sensitive information from you. One thing to point out is that these phishing links don't always display as full URL links. They are often embedded within text such as click here, view link, etc., or even displayed as buttons, as you can see on the right-hand side there. There can also be multiple phishing links within the email. And a best practice we recommend here is hovering over that hyperlink. This is going to display the destination URL, which would be where that link would actually take you to. You then can do a comparison to determine if it's legitimate or not. And this can be done on both a mobile device and on a desktop. So on the desktop, you would do the hover over. On a mobile device, you would tap and hold, and that will display the URL that it would lead you to.
So throughout all of these demonstrations, we're actually going to use live and real phishing emails that we've detected here in Cofense, because it's important for everybody to actually see what some of these look like. Sometimes they are sophisticated, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're pretty banal, if you will, like the one we see here. One of the main tactics, or I should say, activities that threat actors are always trying to do is to capture your credentials, right? So they'll present you with a phishing email, whether it's with a link or whether it's with an attachment, with the end goal of getting your username and password, because then that allows them to get into your environment. In doing that, oftentimes it mimics internal services, emails from your IT department, things along those lines. There are some commonalities that you will end up seeing as we go through these examples and presentation itself, insofar as what some of those languages are, insofar as the wording that they're using and the enticements that they're using for you to click. But be aware, the predominant threat that we see from a phishing threat landscape is credential phishing. That is the intent of those threat actors. And this one here is a great example of it. So this is, looks like it's something that came from your human resources department, that there's a new form that you have to fill, new benefits package. Click here. Once you click on this one, by way of kind of the example of how the flow goes here, once you click on that link, it actually points you to a legitimate looking page that has screenshots of what purport to be benefits package documentation. All intents and purposes, it looks legitimate. This looks like a Microsoft SharePoint page or a hosted page. However, when you click on any one of those images to get to that further point, you actually end up with a login prompt. This is not a legitimate login prompt. This is actually, it's a fake login, so that when you put that information in, once you put your username and password in, this one specifically, it'll actually take that information and send it to the threat actor, and then it'll update saying wrong password entered. That's a very common tactic, because now it's a common thing. We type our passwords in fast, right? I do it myself. I take at least 3 tries on average to put my password in to any prompt. So it's fairly common, and oftentimes too, we all use different passwords. I might just try to put in a different password. So threat actors have kind of honed in on the fact that if they prompt and say wrong or password invalid, either you'll try to retype it so they can verify that you typed the same thing in, or you'll enter in a different password that might be used for something else. So now they're actually capturing more information. So Rachel talked about URL phishing. We just kind of gave the highlight of one of the larger threats of the phishing landscape, which is obviously credential phishing. But attachments are still prevalent within phishing attacks. With anything with this type of threat, there's ebbs and flows, kind of peaks and valleys into the tactics that attackers are using. In the past, attachments were leveraged a lot for malware and actual payloads, exe files, actual content that has the malware itself. And while we still do see that, it's rarer, I should say, than credential phishing. A lot of times you'll see attachments in phishing attacks where it's a Word document, or it's a zip file, or it's even an HTML file, as in the two examples here. And generally speaking, those are really used, one, to entice you to perform an action, which is open the attachment. And once you've done that, you're already kind of committed, right, to the engaging with this email. And generally, in those attachments, it is another document, it is another form that contains a link. And again, that same process. Once you click on the link, you'll go to a login page, put in your username and password. If you do put in your username and password, I should say, the attackers capture that information. What's important to note that regardless, I should say, whether it's a URL-based attack, phishing email, or an attachment-based phishing email, the intent could be a credential, harvesting. It could be malware harvesting. This is more of that delivery, that enticement, that lure to get you to perform an action. So that's why you always got to be conscious of what the email contents are. What is that attachment? What is that link within there? As Rachel said, hover over the link. For the attachment, if you were to open it, really look through it. Did you expect to receive that email? Did you expect to receive that attachment? And have a healthy dose of skepticism. Now, the last kind of category, if you will, is pretext phishing. Now, pretext is a little bit different. There's a lot of subcategories that we're going to talk about in the next 40, 50 minutes here. But pretext is really the icebreaker, if you will. I'm going to send you an email that has no text, or it has no links, it has no attachments. I'm just trying to get you to engage in a dialogue with me. Oftentimes, these are how scams are purported. Insofar as, you just purchased something, we just charged your credit card, call this phone number, or, reply to this email if you didn't do this purchase and we'll refund you. A lot of what we're seeing nowadays is just as you see here, kindly reconfirm your cell phone number. This email itself was actually sent from this organization's CEO. So I actually had the CEO's name and everything on it. Because again, it's enticing. Now, once you reply to that email, now that initiates a dialogue. You're kind of hooked, if you will. From a social engineering perspective, they just broke the communication barrier. So now you're engaging, which means you're more likely to believe any asks that they have for you in subsequent emails. We'll get into very specific examples on these as we go through this presentation, but generally speaking, phishing emails fall into those categories, right? The URLs, attachments, pretext, and credential phishing being the predominant end game for attackers nowadays.
Thanks, Josh. And those were great examples. So how can you spot a phish? What are some of the things to look out for stemming from those examples we just showed? We call these indicators. And some key indicators of phishing emails are going to include things such as a suspicious sender's address. Do you know this person? Does the person's display name match that of the associated sender address? Or is there urgent or threatening language? Threat actors will often use this type of language to instill a sense of urgency or fear. And by doing so, it takes you out of that rational thinking zone in which you're more likely to do what is being asked for. Is there spelling or grammatical errors? Threat actors aren't looking to make the perfect email, which is why you will often find misspellings, broken sentences, or even extremely vague requests. The driver there is to get one person to act upon it. They're not worried about email etiquette. Are there unusual links or attachments? This is where you can be situationally aware of what's being asked for and how. For example, if you normally would receive something through an attachment and it comes across as a link or vice versa, something might trigger saying that, that's not right. Be suspicious of it. They will often request personal information. You should never be asked for sensitive information over email, usernames, passwords, credit cards, none of that over email. That's a pretty big indicator there. And the last one is, does the signature match the sender? So does the person listed in the signature, in this case, all the best, match from the from address? In this particular example here on the screen, you can see that Laura Lyons is not Dr. Watson.
So, everybody generally thinks, or I shouldn't say everybody, a lot of individuals think that phishing is old hat, right? It's been around forever, since computers, really, since email started, and it doesn't really change much. It's always the same thing. That's not true. Phishing constantly evolves. I manage a team here that does phishing analysis day in and day out, and every single day we're seeing changes and pivots. And what's important for everybody to know is kind of what those changes are, because that's kind of your barometer of what to look out for within your environment with your emails, whether it's within your organization or personally within your own, personal mailboxes. So generally speaking, what we're seeing is a large increase in phishing attacks across the board. Insofar as volume and those that are actually making it into inboxes. Now, that's not generally, I'm not casting blame on any services, but that is kind of how the landscape works. Attackers are always innovating. They're always iterating to find out ways that give them the best return, if you will, on their investment. Which means getting an email into a mailbox in front of an end user. So they're constantly updating and changing that. So over the last year, we have a couple of charts here. The upper two charts, the red and the blue, there are actually from the Cofense annual report, the 2024 annual report. Whereas we've noticed between 2022 and 2023, over 100% increase in the volume of malicious emails making it into inboxes. And our teams internally are essentially processing one malicious email a minute every single day because of that volume. So this is why it's important to really understand some of these fundamentals about phishing attacks. Which these other charts here, and I won't walk through them specifically, we can kind of go through them at a high level. But what you're seeing here is a mixture of, on the left side, that is some data from the Verizon Data Breach Report for 2024. And in the lower right there is actually from the ftc.gov website. And what you're seeing is that email is a predominant vector. The volume of email and email being a cause of a breach is significant. Depending on what report you look at, the numbers vary because it's obviously based on the sample size and the recipients to their surveys. But on average, you hear numbers anywhere from 79% up to 97% of all breaches are caused by phishing attacks. Well, I can't give an exact number, obviously, but doing security for the past 25 years, I'd put it well into the 90% myself personally because of what we've seen. Now, what you're seeing here is there's a large volume of email. And if we're looking at that left chart specifically, I want to call out, you're seeing an increase over the last year in pretext emails because the email security companies are actually getting better at filtering out URLs, filtering out attachments, and doing certain types of language determinations, bad grammar, things like that. However, getting an email that says, "Are you available? Give me your cell so I can call you," is something my boss has sent me in the past, right? So we're not going to filter those out. Organization security providers are not going to filter those out. So pretexting from an email basis is actually on the rise because, again, threat actors are finding what works and they're moving towards what works. So AI and ML is a hot topic, right? It's in the news almost every single day, and rightly so, really. Now, everybody, I've had a lot of conversations. We've had a lot of conversations, I should say, about the value of AI and ML and the impact of AI and ML in the phishing threat landscape. And why can't we, defenders, not Cofense specifically, but defenders, keep up with the attackers? Well, there's a lot of reasons, right? So for the attackers, for them to set up an AI instance, it's really insanely simple because they don't care about code control. They don't care about false positives. They don't care about accuracy. They're just looking for quick end results. Generally speaking, they can use pre-made services. And oftentimes either they're using them for free or they're just using fraud money, basically dirty money, right, to pay for those services. So it's really not out of their pocket. Um, them being able to do this is actually scary effective because they don't have any tech debts. They don't have any customers that they have to, maintain product and, various levels of quality control and compliance requirements. So they can just build something. It works fantastic. Lessons learned, delete that whole thing, start something fresh, and, kind of iterate at a very quick cycle. That allows them to actually determine what works so much faster than what us in the community are able to detect in kind of that real time. Additionally, through leveraging AI, they can determine additional threat vectors that they might not have thought of on their own. So actually, again, that's that rapid iteration of how to try to get an email into a mailbox, whether it's changing the email header, using different languages, trying to use these other services to put URLs in there, how have you. And with all of this, with all of the large language models out there, they're starting to be able to create emails that have that perfect pitch, that perfect tone. And, we're even kind of purporting that if you look at all of the data breaches that happen, every day we're seeing something in the news, right? And especially when they say that, the X number of gigabytes or terabytes of data was stolen from an organization or exfiltrated from an organization, there a large amount of that data usually is email data. So now threat actors can actually take all of those emails, create a large language model, and actually generate an email that uses the vernacular of the organization in question, uses the same language, the department names, the titling, all of that. Now, contrast that to defenders. False positives are bad. False negatives are bad. So we have to try to find that sweet spot. What data can we use to actually build AI models? There's compliance requirements that we have to adhere to, and we should by all means. Privacy requirements. Because of all that, we need specialized experience, specialized individuals, and it costs a lot of money. I mean, millions of dollars to actually build out and deploy a very pervasive AI to do any type of detection or articulation like this. And the reality is, it's only as good as what we know. Because we need data to train the models, we need to know what's happening now to use that to train the models. So if the attackers are always innovating and we're always kind of a half a step behind, our detection from an AI stance would always be within that margin. We do increase our efficiency insofar as detection ratios, but again, it's kind of half-stepping it overall. And not having data obviously makes this problem harder because now we don't know about the new attack vectors. And it's really hard, even for analysts sometimes, to detect what's real or what's fake. It has all of the indicators that it came from within your organization. It's a provider that you use. The link is legitimate, but is that real or not real? It's a lot more difficult than most actually give it most attribute to it. Excuse me. So saying that, what are we seeing? We're seeing a huge amount of brand impersonation, specifically for the reasons I just mentioned, right? Brand impersonation is just as it sounds. The attackers are creating phishing emails that are spoofing brands that your organization, use. Why? Because we become desensitized to them. I have SSO, for our organization. I get the pop-ups all the time. Do I always check that I clicked on something that caused that pop-up to come up? I'm going to say yes, but the reality is obviously we're all kind of inundated with all of these things. So when you get an email saying, download this spreadsheet that was shared from within your organization, it's an official looking SharePoint email body or an Office 365 email body, you're more enticed to actually click on it. And this goes back to what Rachel was talking about. If this isn't your normal distribution method for documents within your organization, start to question it. But we are seeing a huge amount of brand impersonation. Now, in the Cofense 2024 annual report, we actually did a breakdown based on the content that we've seen, the millions of malicious emails that we saw throughout 2024, and broke it down by what brands are we seeing the most. Now, it's not surprising that Microsoft is by far the largest brand spoof that we've seen. And that's because most organizations use Microsoft for something, right? Whether it's for email specifically, whether it's for OneDrive, whether it's for Active Directory, whether it's for SharePoint, Lucid Charts, Power BI, I mean, you name it, right? We all generally have some type of interface organizationally with Microsoft. So that's not surprising. You do tend to see bursts here and there of different branding depending on what's going on throughout the world, whether it's globally or even time of year. But generally speaking, Microsoft, large margin, highest volume branding, followed by Adobe. Uh, any organization lives and dies by PDFs, right? We're definitely getting documentation sent back forth here and there. So it's not unheard of to get an email that, says, here's your Adobe document, here's your Adobe PDF, click here. So from that stance, as Rachel mentioned before, keep an eye out. And so far as the patterning, if you're receiving emails that are being distributed in a way that's not normally done within your organization, click here to open up this SharePoint document versus you're normally just they're attaching the document and sending it directly to you. Ask those questions. Keep an eye open for what's happening.
And as Josh mentioned, we have seen an increase in variations of phishing types in the threat landscape. So we're going to touch on a few of those in the next couple of minutes. The first one we're going to start out with is QR codes. And threat actors can use malicious QR codes that link directly to phishing websites to either steal your personal information or download malware on your device. And we first started to see a huge ramp up in threat actors leveraging QR codes in mid to late 2023, and it went full speed into 2024. And while we have seen a little bit of a dip in usage, actors were using QR codes for several different reasons. First, the phishing link is actually hidden inside the QR image. And QR codes became the new normal as the world shifted to using them in our everyday life, even accessing restaurant menus through a QR code. It wasn't odd to be asked to scan them. And when scanning them, more than likely you're taking out your own personal device, which takes you outside of the protection of any security measures that your organization may have in place. What can you do and what can you look out for with QR codes? First, check the source of the QR code. You can do this by checking the URL, or you can use a QR code scanner app. Second is always be cautious when scanning a QR code from an unknown source. There should always be another way you can access or find that same information. And don't enter personal information or login credentials through a QR code method. More than likely is going to take you to a landing page to ask for that. Always go directly to the source.
So QR codes are interesting because that actually highlights what we were just talking about regarding attacker innovation and iteration. Late last year, Cofense saw a huge upswing in QR code utilization. When it first started, when we started seeing that shift, the QR codes were directly in the email body itself. So, purported, we'll use Microsoft, right? You receive this, you need to multi-factor authenticate into Microsoft, scan this QR code, enter in your passwords, signed Microsoft. And when you would do that with your phone, as Rachel said, now you're outside of your organization's security barrier. Now your phone's asking you for your username and password. And, generally speaking, either you did or you didn't enter it. But what's happened very quick because of that huge volume and that surge is a lot of email security appliances and filters started just blocking emails or doing a higher level of diligence for analysis, I should say, emails that had QR codes directly in the body of the email. So attackers identified, or I should say threat actors identified, that they were getting less success with their phishing campaigns. So then they started shifting. And now what we're seeing a lot of is attachments. The QR codes are in the attachments. Or there's a link, which is actually an interesting one, but there's a link in the email, and if you click on the link, you go to a page that has a QR code. Again, the intent here is by the threat actor is to get you out of your security boundary, outside of your computer that's being monitored by your security team and how have you. So what we're seeing here is that these QR codes are now in the actual attachment itself. What you're seeing here on the left side is the attachment that from the email that we actually just showed. Now, the email that I was showing here is really, you made a request. Here's the document you asked for. Appreciate it. You open it up, there's the request. And once you actually scan that QR code, which looks legitimate, that looks like a DocuSign email or an attachment. I mean, it's got the DocuSign branding on it, everything. But once you actually scan that QR code, you get a Microsoft login page. Now, even if you were expecting a DocuSign, or it's not unheard of for you to receive a DocuSign email, the dissemination mechanism is weird because DocuSign just uses links. But even if you were to actually scan this QR code, why would there be a Microsoft login to a DocuSign document? I mean, unless you actually had, some type of authentication or SSO set up already with DocuSign, generally it's a different login. Just by way of example.
So it's not just that we have folks on Josh's team that are doing dedicated threat analysis 24/7, looking for these threats, but they're feeding that threat intelligence to my team that builds the educational content around this. So as soon as Cofense saw this over 300% uptick in QR code based attacks, we kicked into high gear as well, making all types of different educational content around QR codes. That included simulations that come directly into your inbox to simulate the type of attacks that Josh was just showing you. But on this slide, I've got just some examples of how we're doing straight up security awareness education based on those real threats. So every single one of these screenshots taken from some of our educations are vehicles for the real threat intelligence that Cofense generates through our threat intel. We've got a couple down here that are actually games, animated games, that the QR code threat is highlighted as one of the challenges. And we've got a little bit more straightforward educations here with a video education up in the top and a very detailed infographic that if you wanted to, you could even print out. Anytime someone scans the QR code inside the education, they're going to be taken to an education saying, hey, don't scan QR codes. So there's a little bit of bait in here as well. And this will be a theme that as we go through and continue talking about the different threats, you'll sort of see how the threat in the wild is going to manifest in our educational content with a high degree of fidelity.
All right, next up, you may have heard or seen these terms: phishing, phone scam, or TOAD, which stands for telephone-oriented attack delivery. And these can start in a variety of different ways: an incoming phone call, or even an email that requests you to call a number. Text message, right? This happens a lot. It has a number linked within the message body, but the end goal remains the same. Threat actors want you to perform an action or give up sensitive information over the phone. And 3 best practices here. 1 is consider the context and situation. Were you expecting a call? Or if it feels urgent or asks for unnecessary details, be suspicious. Always guard your credentials. Never provide information such as passwords or credit card numbers over the phone. And verify the caller's credentials by contacting them directly. If you are unsure about a call, go to that organization's website. You can find trusted numbers listed on their official website. Or if you don't recognize the sender, do a quick search on that phone number, which can provide a pretty good indication if the number is legitimate or if it has been used in a scam.
We actually see these a lot because really it's kind of where the money is, if you will. We see this a lot, making it into corporate inboxes as well as personal inboxes, mailboxes. The predominant theme that we see is you recently made this purchase. We billed your credit card. If this is incorrect, call us. When you call them, they're going to ask for your credit card information. You put your credit card information, now you really did pay for it, and then some. That's the most common. We have seen other tactics insofar as where it comes, it kind of purports to be from your IT department. They need to update your MFA. So to call them so that you can relay your password because they need it to be able to make this change. And then you call them, they'll ask some information. Additionally, we've seen it from instances where it's purported to be from your IT department. There's a problem with your computer. We need to fix it remotely. Please give us a call and we'll walk you through the process. You give them a call and they'll say, go to this link, and they'll kind of tell you what it is, www.something.com, and download this package, which will allow me to remote into your computer. They are right. It will allow them to remote into your computer. The problem is they're not your IT team, and they just deployed malware into your system, and they kind of, gathering all your data together. So it is, we see a gauntlet of tactics and types in this. Everything from, kind of that invoice to the side there where, hey, you just purchased the Starlink equipment and service. If that's not real, call this number here. And the reality is the attackers are going to use every example you could possibly ever think of from any type of services, organizationally, internally, however they can get you to make that call to engage. And again, by volume, these are generally from a scam perspective for the phishing and phone scam kind of category. These are the types that we're seeing consistently day in and day out.
So we address this in a couple of different ways here at Cofense, and just these three small examples, some of them are pretty straightforward. Our sort of Doctor Who themed guide to phishing is to make these threats that would be kind of intimidating because of the multi-steps and the way it comes together a little bit more accessible. As well as we have created a series of simulators where you can basically simulate these types of attacks on a mobile device without actually exposing your mobile device or publicly monitored networks to this sort of simulated traffic. So we have, phishing simulators. We have an actual service within Cofense that does basically toad simulation, where you're calling into a number that we monitor, and it's an actual live phone call, and we're able to provide metrics on the back end of this. So this is something that we lean into very hard in a wide variety, a whole spectrum of ways to address this based on the maturity level of your learner population and the level of sophistication of the attacks that you're seeing in your threat environment.
All right, next let's talk about smishing. Smishing is when threat actors send text messages to lure people into sharing private data or clicking on a malicious link. A couple ways to stay safe here is always be cautious of unsolicited text messages. If you get a text, for example, from your bank, did you just buy something? Or did you just initiate a password reset? Do not click on links or download attachments from unknown senders, and verify by contacting the organization directly. Now, a common theme you will see with a lot of these variations we've talked about is that they all will appear to come from legitimate sources. This is also why a lot of these best practices we've been talking about may appear similar, because they are. Absolutely. No matter the situation, it's always best to verify through other avenues available to you, or go directly to the source. And if ever in doubt, report it.
The majority of these that we see are generally more person focused versus organizationally. However, we do see some that are organizationally focused insofar as, did you just log into this? Click here and enter your password to confirm type of things. But what we found kind of over time here is that the smishing is it follows more of an almanac, if you will. Insofar as we're getting up into the holiday season. If you haven't, you probably will, because I know I did today. USPS delivery problem. Contact us. You got to pay a fee. Amazon delivery held up. Contact us. Click here or make this phone call to pay the fee because it's stuck in customs. Arbitrarily throwing some things out here, right? But again, to Rachel's point, the action is what the enticement is. Looking at these, the one on the right, or excuse me, the left there, it says, well, USPS, which is United States Postal Service, trying to schedule it, confirm here. That link, whatever it is, w4tka.info, that's not USPS. That's not their website, right? So a little bit of due diligence, skepticism goes a long way with these. But again, most of these are really focused on either, kind of personal. Did you buy this? This purchase didn't go through. This purchase did go through. And some of the themes are almost identical to what we've kind of talked about. And to Rachel's point, it is very thematic insofar as these are just different avenues of really pushing out the same messaging, the same lures to everybody.
I can unmute myself. So, like Vishing and Toad, smishing content focuses on mobile device delivery. That's where it's going to show up. So, our approach from an educational content is also to be as broad as possible and give you as many of the learning activities that are going to prepare you to avoid these kind of threats. Right front and center is one of our smishing simulators where we're simulating receiving SMS messages on your mobile device. We're taking real threats that we've gotten from the threat landscape, manifesting in an interactive education, and really letting you gauge and develop that sensitivity to this doesn't feel exactly right. Or to Josh's point, that's not USPS's domain, that I'm looking at there. We also have infographics, the Ghostbusters themed smishing infographic that we have on the side. These are not super dense from a learning objective standpoint and are more designed to keep it in someone's mind. If you print these out, put them up in your office, and build a culture of awareness around them, it may be that small grain of awareness that is all someone needs to think twice. A lot of these times we're not asking you, we're not training you on deep technical issues. It's just take a moment, take 4 seconds before you click that link just to look at it and think twice. And often that is the difference between a successfully reported threat to your SOC versus a breach. So from an educational standpoint, that's where we're going, and that's our sweet spot. So.
All right, everyone's favorite subject, BEC, business email compromise. Not new. It has been around for a very long time, but it is still very much relevant. BEC is when a threat actor poses as a trusted figure to entice someone into situations such as sending money or to gain access control to organizational assets or even divulge confidential company information. And these emails are traditionally very conversation style. They don't contain any links or attachments to start because the goal is to get someone to just respond and engage. And then it takes off. And one common example you may have heard of over and over again is being asked to purchase gift cards, right? From a trusted source, your CEO, your CFO. So some common best practices we always recommend here is 1, contact the person or organization directly. In today's world, there are so many different ways to contact someone. So follow up with a phone call or through your company's messaging platform, whatever that may be. Next is look at the reply to address and domain name. Go ahead and check to see if what the actual reply to address, if it actually matches the original sender's address. A lot of the times, those do not match. And also, they use a lot of copycat domains that can be ever so slightly different. An example here is using a 0 instead of an O, right? Click glance, hard to tell. And then the last one you see there is always follow company best practices and policies. Be skeptical. Even if the request comes through as margin, I need you to do this right now, always follow your company procedures to verify.
There is a lot of variation when it comes to this category. And we can't possibly, it would be a separate briefing in and of itself just to kind of talk about that. We've done a lot of work in this category. We've talked to a lot of victims, organizations that were subject to these types of impacts over the years. And we've done a series of different research projects and related documentations on these threats. As Rachel mentioned, the goal here generally is that initial email is to promote urgency, a sense of urgency, authority, and engagement. Oftentimes, these are made to look like they're coming from a senior executive within your organization, whether it's basically your C-suite, if not your CEO within an organization. And it's appealing to human nature of we want to help. And if there's an urgency and it's coming from a high-level executive and they're saying, I want your help, a lot of people end up dual replying to these things. So, in this example here is, this individual, which this was a spoof of the CEO, stating that your insights are greatly appreciated. I want to talk about this project. Can you review the schedule? Let me know when you're available. Give me your phone number versus them giving, you their phone number. And I'll give you a call, because now they're just going to use fake phone numbers and things along those lines. And the email addresses, they'll use a lot of different spoofing techniques insofar as, so the from address may say the person's name, but it's, at ru.com. So it's coming from a server that isn't your organization's server, email server. And generally speaking, once you reply, they start that dialogue. You get on the phone call. Often, to Rachel's point, a majority of the time, this type of is buy some gift cards because I have this project, or I want to give you some gift cards. So why don't you purchase them and I'll reimburse you later? But send me the code so that way I can put it in our finance log. Things along those lines. There's obviously 1,001 different variations. Now, I mentioned, obviously, a good majority of the times we're seeing BEC emails, it's either spoofing the CEO. We've seen spoofing of external service providers saying, I just changed the billing address, or the bank account number for this last invoice. Please use this new bank account number for any future invoices. And that way, they get the money. But you see this, I talked before about kind of that phishing almanac, the time of year types of attacks. This is one of them. Generally, if towards the end of the year, a lot of people are changing bank accounts, changing benefits, things along those lines. So this one's actually spoofing an employee, sent directly to the finance department. I need to update my bank account information. I have a new bank account. What's the process? Finance would reply saying, oh, here's the process. We need this information. They'd send it. Actually, we've talked to a couple of individuals that have had this happen recently, within the last 6 to 8 months, and they didn't even recognize that it happened for 1 or 2 paychecks, right? So now there's that personal impact in addition to the business impact as well.
So Josh's great examples there show how business email compromise can be, reduced down in some cases to a single email, and that impersonation can take place in a very brief interaction, and the compromise can be presented and executed very quickly. We have really good educational examples of how that can show up in the 2 different infographics we have on the side. But there's also an aspect of business email compromise that goes a little bit deeper. When you are actually scammed over the long haul, sometimes a romance scam takes place inside of the business email compromise. So we actually built some very in-depth training. We call it 90 Days of BEC, where it contextualizes how insidious, how simple it would be to trust someone that you think, is a trusted vendor, which is an example here, where there's vendor scam here, but it ends up having huge financial implications, but it's told in an interactive way where you as the learner go through and understand how susceptible just a human being is to this type of manipulation, and how dangerous business email compromise can become, especially when you have a determined threat actor who wants to get through your defenses.
All right. One trend on the rise that I'm sure a lot of you have heard of are deepfakes. And deepfakes use artificial intelligence, AI, to create very realistic videos or audio recordings to impersonate company executives or other trusted individual sources. And in these types of situations, always be cautious of unexpected or unusual requests, even if they appear to come from someone you trust. Think of the situation, right? If you were being asked to buy gift cards, do you normally purchase things like this for your company, or is that another person or department within your organization? Verify through multiple channels. Again, so many other avenues in today's world that we can contact someone just to check, just to verify. So give them a phone call, send them a chat, verify through email. So use different avenues just to double check. And then that last one, staying informed. And this is not only as it relates to deepfake detection, but to all of the latest attack methods out in the threat landscape. Whether they're the ones we mentioned today or any ones that may form in the future, we always recommend to stay up to date on what's going on in the threat landscape.
This is another topic that could be an entire briefing in and of itself. So we commonly get asked, how are deepfakes being used in phishing attacks? How can we detect them? Does Cofense detect them? Does this technology detect? Can this technology detect? So first, how are they being used? Well, again, it depends on here you're kind of slicing and dicing it, so it really depends on definition and scoping. Are attackers using AI, which is really deepfakes AI, right? Are they using it to create email content? The answer is yes. Can you detect that? No, not really, because it's just content. It's words. They're just using it outside of the fact that we're starting to see obviously better grammar in phishing attacks. We can, not arbitrarily, but kind of ancillary attribute that to the use of LLMs for code or for text generation. But there's no indicator. There's no actual attribute within that would say that was deepfake, right? Well, what about video deepfakes? Is that real? Is that really happening? And do we see it? Yes, yes, and yes. Right. So we do see that we actually have talked to individuals, organizations where they received an email, the dialogue happened, a face, video chat occurred, and they were talking to their CEO. It wasn't their CEO. It looked like their CEO. It wasn't the CEO. Well, how do you combat that? How do you detect it? Right now, for live streaming video, the technology is still catching up in regards to how do you identify that that's a deep fake. There may be artifacts within the actual rendering of the video, whether it's little glitches or, different types of nuances in there. But the reality is that technology, that availability isn't there. So how would you combat that? Well, if I got a Facebook video chat request from my CEO, immediately I'm suspect. Why wouldn't we use our corporate links? Even if we got a Zoom request from my CEO, but I know that's not his Zoom link, or my company doesn't use Zoom, why would I accept it? Why wouldn't I just reach out? So this goes back to all of the other material we've talked about so far, which is trust but verify. Reach out. And, some people say, well, it's my CEO. Trust me, they're going to want you to reach out to them if it's not them. And if it is them, they'll appreciate your secure mindedness insofar as, trying to protect yourself and the organization. So now the one I didn't talk about, right, is the voice. Again, that is something we've seen. And we've talked to individuals where, hey, give me a call. Sometimes it was in some of these BEC attacks we just mentioned. And when you contact or when they make that call, it sounds like the person that they're talking to. But again, go back to the fundamentals. Well, one, I'm not aware of anything that can conclusively say this is a deep fake audio rendering, right? But go back to the standards, the bases, right? Is that the person's phone number that you just contacted? Look it up in your address book, within your organization's address book. Reach out to that individual directly through whatever, if you have WhatsApp, Slack, Team, Microsoft Teams, whatever. Hey, did you want me to call you? Is this your number? Again, even if it's the CEO, well, CEO's going to get mad I reached out. I would hazard 99.99% chance that your CEO would much rather you ask them versus doing that and then putting the organization and yourself in a compromising situation. So, we are seeing changes in the threat landscape with deepfakes and how they're being used and how they're being leveraged. And the detection technology is, when we talked about AI, it's lagging. It's lagging. So the best that we've identified really to combat or identify these is a healthy dose of skepticism, trust but verify, and follow the same tenets that we've discussed here, that Rachel's talked about, that we've all kind of talked about so far, as trust but verify, validate, keep an eye open. On Cofense's side, we're processing millions of emails, every single month. And how we identify it, deepfakes, generally speaking, we don't, but we do have our human analysts going through and actually parsing and reviewing and analyzing each of these emails. And if something looks a little too good to be true, we document it and we do what we can. But again, that technology is still kind of a step behind, because every time, the attackers are just innovating and they keep kind of evolving the state of the art, if you will.
And a great follow-on to what Josh was saying is that from an email perspective, he's spot on. But we also know that on the back end of some of these longer engagements that may start in an email and end up on a video call, that we see, the real impact that deepfake interactions can have. From a content perspective, we've also found that there are some significant learning objectives that can really help. And one of those is actually seeing deepfakes a lot. If you as a learner are able to actually look at AI generated avatars, right, that are supposed to be a real human, you start to develop a little bit of a sixth sense of what looks a little bit off, just in terms of how they're going to be lit a lot of times, right? They sometimes look a little bit too perfect. Their diction may be a little bit too on point. They may not mumble like a normal person does. So we've created a whole variety of deepfake content. Some of it's metaphorical, some of it's straight up putting you in a situation of documented deepfake uh, scams that have happened. Every human that you see on this slide is not a human. Every one of these is an AI generated deepfake that Cofense has made. When you go into these educations, you interact with them. They put you in a situation where, to Josh's point, you have that chance to think in the interactivity, could I get out of this and verify? Should I just move forward? And we put those thoughts in your head so that if you're ever faced with this, that idea will come to the surface and you'll be able to act appropriately.
Alrighty, we have covered a lot of information today, and we do hope that you all found this helpful. Some additional items of what can you do? How can you help? We're going to cover a few best practices to keep in mind. And the first one you see there is report the email.
So I have to do a shout out to my reporter team, my guys that build all the different versions of Cofense Reporter here at Cofense, is hit that button. If you are suspicious of anything, report it. I've talked to multiple customers from small companies to the biggest companies in the world talking about, the high percentages of spam getting reported. And guess what? They don't care. They would so much rather you report something than let something malicious get through. So if it doesn't feel right, report it. Keep building that reporting culture within your employee population, and you're going to be so much better off in the long run. You won't regret it. So remember that.
And that's not only through your desktop, right, at work. That's also through your mobile device. There's multiple ways to report something, multiple avenues that you can leverage. So when it comes to social and brand identification, we all see and interact with various brands and social media platforms every single day. So a couple things is, one, look out for old logos and slight variations. And this could be an image is stretched, or the colors are different, or even missing images. That's a pretty good indication. Use bookmarks and or direct links, right? A site you've already been to that has been verified and you trust, go ahead and bookmark it. Always inspect the domain. The slightest difference, as we mentioned, right, a 0 can be in replacement of an O, can be completely unnoticed by a quick glance. So go ahead and take a look at that domain. And then threat actors are always and often going to rely on those emotional triggers to take you out of rational thinking. And these triggers are not just fear or urgency. They can also be excitement. You've won, click here. So it can be a variety of emotions that they're trying to get you to just act upon and take that action. And as always, we've said over and over again, if in doubt, report it.
Nobody's perfect, right? And even if you are as close as you can be, breaches happen, data compromises happen. You can't generally go, especially recently, a couple of weeks without seeing something in the news where this service lost a bunch of user records, usernames, and passwords, or how have you. As historically relevant as it's always been talked about, password management's important. Passwords management important. I would guarantee, if I asked for a show of hands, not obviously being able to see anybody's hands, and I said, who uses the same password for multiple things? We're all going to raise our hands, myself included, right? We got to stop doing that. I mean, really, we got to stop doing that. Password hygiene is important. Create complex passwords. Most services now require you to, right? You can't actually create a password unless it's, it's got, the what's the capital of, New York, what color is this dog, whatever it is, they have all these weird requirements. But it's important because the more complex the password, the harder it is generally to crack, or to obtain, to guess, I guess the best way of saying it. Use different passwords. That's key. I've had passwords compromised. My wife recently had passwords compromised. My mother's recently had passwords compromised, right? I wasn't affected because I actually, for my banks, for, my credit card, my bank account, this over here, I actually have started using different passwords for everything. This one was compromised, but that's all I got to deal with. I just got to change that one. My mother uses the same password for everything. Her account was compromised. Everything was compromised. She lost her Facebook, the whole nine. So she had to rebuild it. She couldn't get it back. I mean, it was a whole to do, right? My wife, similar. And I'm not bashing anybody. And if she was here, she'd yell at me. But my wife, same thing. And ended up her credit card getting compromised. And then they got into her email account, same password. So they were able to, that's how they were able to authorize things, right? Different passwords for different things. It's paramount. Now, how are you going to remember all of them? Use a vault. I'm not purporting that you should use a notebook, but if that's all you got, use a notebook, write it down, and lock it up. But there's a lot of services out there that you can have on your phone, you can have on your computer, that are cloud-based, that have a decent level of security, that you can put in your own security controls. Use a vault for your passwords. Use MFA, multi-factor authentication, for any critical service, your bank accounts, your credit cards, obviously your organization if they provide that. Even things like Facebook or social media, because that gives you that extra layer of protection. So even if your password was compromised, it was a part of a data breach, they still can't get in because they don't have that second part to get in there. Breaches are going to happen. Compromises are going to happen. What can you do so the impact to you is less? You can do these 4 things.
So following on with all of the primary, I have to say it, learning objectives that Josh and Rachel have given everyone on this call, outside of the office, these things extend as well. Just because you're not sitting at your desk in the office doesn't mean your exposure to cyber threats are going to go away or lessen. Consumer-based threats are rampant. My father-in-law, my parents call me 3 times a week with Social Security scams, consumer-based scams on coupons. Fear of missing out is a big motivator. Understand those risks. Understand, am I feeling, to Rachel's point, excited? Am I feeling, oh no, if I don't stop this, I'm going to have a problem? Really think twice about what's happening. Secure your personal information and use trusted services. Don't end up saying, hey, a web pop-up came up that has good bargains. Let me go look at this web store I've never heard of. You're not going to be happy with the outcome in most cases. Keep everything updated. Those security patches that come along with updates to your software for both your cell phone core operating system, your tablet, your laptop, these are all important to fix vulnerabilities that threat actors are using to gain intrusion. So make sure you stay up on your updates and monitor activity. This could be as big as monitoring your credit to make sure that lines of credit haven't been opened in your name that you didn't authorize. These could be indicators of a breach that you didn't know happened. It's just a state of vigilance that, unfortunately, in this world today, we need to live in. And at the end of it, I'll reiterate what I said on the other slide. Report this activity if something is suspicious. Always keep in mind that if you have a company cell phone or your corporate email is on your personal cell phone, even when you're on vacation, you may be an intrusion point for a threat actor to gain access to your company through that mobile device. Keep that in mind and guard it just as you would your work laptop.
We've gone through a lot of information today, just in the last hour. Cofense has created a variety of different Cybersecurity Awareness Month material that is available on our website for download. And that includes individual training, that includes posters for your organization, organizational training. And it is freely available. So please visit our website and by all means, download and let us know if you find use on it. Now, that being said, based on everything you've learned today, we provided you a couple of options on how to get to that material. Which one should you use? All joking aside, both are actually valid and they are authorized to go to the right place. Or are they? Thank you, everybody. Really do appreciate everybody's time today. For any questions that we weren't able to get to throughout our dialogue, we'll absolutely see what we can do to kind of loop back. Rachel, Lee, appreciate the time. And if you do have any
I
parting
do
words.
see one question that I think I could answer in 10 seconds, though, that just came in. Someone answered, are there plans to create longer training materials that can be uploaded to your LMS, or for those of you who don't know, learning management system? Yes, we have multiples. We have a comprehensive module that we just uploaded that's about 28 to 35 minutes long. It covers all the learning objectives in our cybersecurity body of knowledge. And we're continuing to add more. So those are available. If you're not having success finding it, please reach out to your professional service or CX representative.
And I will answer one as well before we close things down. One question came through is, does Cofense email protection service filter out QR code phishes? We actually have several different capabilities related to QR codes within both our security awareness training. We do have QR code simulations, and we do have capabilities on our PDR, our phishing detection and response products as well, for QR code detection capabilities. And with that, to Josh's point, and to back that up, thank you all so much for joining. We really appreciate it, and we will absolutely follow up to those who had questions.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.